Hello and welcome everybody to a short video that breaks the format of my channel just a little bit, but I thought it would be important to talk about. This is going to be a video book review of the book Final Fantasy V by Chris Kohler. This book was released in the fall of 2017 on ebook and in paperback. As you can see, I went with the paperback by Boss Fight Books. Boss Fight Books publishes a series of books about mostly retro video game content, and most of the books are about this length. If you have played Final Fantasy V, this is going to be a book that has a lot of really cool information for you. It's quite entertaining. It's a very fast and easy read. We're going to go through some of the things of it today. It's written by Chris Kohler, and if you have played a Final Fantasy game, particularly 5, but anything really, likely your video gaming experience has been influenced by this guy right here. Chris Kohler was a very, very early importer of the Japanese Final Fantasy V cart. He's a very influential retro game writer, and his work has really inspired a lot of new video game content producers to get their stuff done, including me, by the way. People work on old games. Likely Chris Kohler has influenced you. You may have even read his FAQ or something ripped off from his FAQ, as we will see. The book is in paperback, a rather short book, 160 pages long ish. It is, not a novel-length book, but it's very informative. It's told in 3 main parts, just like FF5. It has an introduction and World 1, Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 with an epilogue as well. And it kind of also follows 3 different stories. So just like FF5, it is told in series of 3s. So the 3 paths of the book are the path of the characters through the game. So if you've not played FF5, as I imagine most readers of this book will have played it, but if you haven't, follows a basic synopsis of the plotline through the game. It also follows the story of the designers and developers of the game working their way through the development process. So Chris went and interviewed a number of these people and has quotes directly from them, taken from a couple different interviews in his travels. And it also follows, and this was maybe the most interesting for me, his own story with the game, starting with playing Final Fantasy I, getting the import version of FF5, working with his partners to translate some of the pieces to get the old game FAQ for it that was designed for people just with a Japanese ROM, and then also the development of the English ROM hack by the RPGE team, and finally kind of goes on to the legacy of the game today. So it's really three main areas through the story. World 1 is the beginning of everything. So Chris Kohler's work as a zine writer in his early days, his trips to Japan, him getting the FF5 cart in, also kind of the video game market of the time that FF5 came out in the early 90s, especially the JRPG market, referencing their competition with the Dragon Quest series, and his own work on his zine. I have a lot of notes here of notable things that I had pulled out, but I don't want to give away too much of the book for you. This is a very interesting one. Right here, I will tell this story. I hope he doesn't mind if I spoil this too much. When he gets his Japanese FF5 cartridge, rips the tabs out of his Super NES, he turns on the screen, and there's nothing. And you see the Japanese character for the void, which is Mew, nothingness. And then comes the blue logo of Final Fantasy V in the opening title screen, told in very dramatic detail here, which is very cool. I'm not sure how that will turn out in the ebook, but in the paperback book, it is laid out quite nicely. I would like to be able to turn the page and see Mew, nothingness, right there. I love it. Act 2 goes into Act 2 of the game. World 2 is World 2 of the game. For those of you who don't know, you travel to another world starting on Tent Island, which I don't think gets a whole lot of treatment in here. We do read about it a little bit. But this is further in the development of the game, the release of the game, the commercial success of the game, Chris Kohler getting into his own writing business, having a career as a video game journalist and video game writer. And Act 3, The Merged World, is our summary of the book, where we explore things that are going on today with the game, re-releases, the much maligned PlayStation release, which we want to talk about, and he points out a number of very interesting problems with that one. Zephyr becomes Zephyr, Pod de Sol becomes Paddle Through, lots of other things. the disappointment of those of us like me, like myself, who bought that Final Fantasy Anthology book, or the Final Fantasy Anthology game, really were disappointed with the quality of it, especially people like me who I had already been playing the translated ROM on my computer at home for a long time before I bought that, the disc, the double disc of that one. But he does talk about, and this is interesting, the plagiarism of the FAQs that were published for this, of the strategy guides. So we've got different books, the Game Informer FAQ, and also the Prima Games the Brady Games book, which I do have here. This is one of the books that he references, ripped off his FAQ. This is another kind of a legend of this, is that when they took these, they just went to the FAQ written by Chris Kohler and his partners and just went with what he had. And what he points out is these books both had his final party and his recommendations for the final fight. So the jobs mastered were all suggested by Chris Kohler in that FAQ right there at the end. So they just copy and pasted these, and he talks a little bit about I can imagine the anger felt by someone who was just an online publisher at the time, who doesn't have the resources to go after another publisher for just ripping off their work that they had published on GameFAQs several years before. So if you do have that, you can use that as a reference, as I did. And it ends up with conclusion about, people playing the game today. He talks to RK, the runner of the Fiesta, and the enduring legacy of this game because of things like the Fiesta. Now, most notably, this is very, very interesting. There is a very good notes section. And of all things, this is what I used a lot after I read this book, even as I was reading it. There are a lot of very interesting notes in here that he took from his interviews, and he often gives short links in here. Shortly, you can find them on your own. But specific references to the people he talked to, articles that he references, and I went and double-checked a lot of those. So in addition to the time I spent reading the book and enjoying the book, I was able to go and get a whole bunch of extra information just by checking the notes section. So it's very, very well worth doing that, and I feel like in nonfiction books like this, the notes and sources sections just kind of get ignored, but I poured through them, and I went through them very carefully and checked almost everything because I was fascinated by it. I was able to send notes to people on Twitter who had written the RPGE patch that I didn't know that their identities were known, didn't know who they were, so I was able to get in touch with them and thank them for all of their hard work on that. So in general, for someone who has played Final Fantasy V, or someone who is an obsessive player of it like me, this is a very important part of the library, and that's why I went for the paperback rather than the ebook. Both, I'm sure, have all the information that you need. The ebook may even have links in the notes section to make it a little bit easier for you to use, but I wanted to go for the paperback because if you want things like this to continue to be made, you have to support the people who make them. Okay, so you must make sure that if you like the concept of people writing books like this, get those books. Buy those books. Support those creators. Support the publishers who make material like this. It's the same story with games. If you like that games of a certain kind are being made, or you like that your favorite retro games are being released again, support them with your wallet. Vote with your dollars. Vote with your loonies. Vote with your dollary dues. Vote with your euros. Whatever you've got. Show these creators that these kinds of games are important and worth another look. So again, the book is Final Fantasy V, author Chris Kohler, publisher Boss Fight Books, recommended from me.